You're listening to Himalayan Adventure by Vaile. Chapter 30.
1 week later, Mohawk and Maine were sitting in an empty corridor in the hospital, gazing through a window at a small waterfall that flowed through a lush indoor garden. The bandages had been removed from their rapidly healing bodies, and they were wearing plain white clothes provided by the hospital. They had both awoken from their comas 2 hours ago and were struck by the same speechless surprise that all humans experience upon first seeing a yeti. Then the memories of the events on Yala Peak came flooding back, culminating in the avalanche that should have killed them. Outwardly they were calm, but their minds were in turmoil. "Can you believe this place?" asked Mohawk. Maine shook his head. A pink scar covered one side of this face and extended to his ear, which was partly covered by his silver hair. "I'm in a permanent state of shock at the moment," he said. "If North Korea ever finds out about all of this," Mohawk began to say. Maine looked around and replied, "We need to make sure that doesn't happen. Flat Top is going to wake up at any time," Mohawk said. "When he does, he's going to realize he hit the jackpot." Maine stared at the tranquil garden in silence. "Maybe we need to do something about that," he muttered. "You mean, kill him?" gulped Mohawk. Maine shook his head and replied, "I was thinking more along the lines of exposing his secret." Mohawk looked at his brother. "But that will mean exposing our secret as well," he said. "I don't think the Yetis are going to be very happy when they find out who we really are and why we're really here." "You're not wrong about that," Maine grunted. "But what choice do we have? If we don't tell anybody about Flat Top, this place is doomed. I don't suppose we can just leave a note next to Flat Top's bed and make a run for it," Mohawk suggested hopefully. "Run to where?" Maine said. "I don't know how to get out of this place, and we're not going to be able to hide out here for long. We don't exactly blend in with the population. What do you think the Yetis will do when we tell them?" Mohawk mused. Maine shrugged and replied, "Might throw us down the deepest crevasse they can find. I wouldn't blame them." "Not exactly the perfect end to my first trip overseas," Mohawk remarked with a sigh. "I guess we should start by telling Burnmaster." Maine agreed. After asking a nurse where Burnmaster's room was, they made their way through the corridors in silence. Aside from the superficial scars on their faces and hands, they were in perfect health. It never occurred to the GXs to question their own rapid recovery, but there were others in the hospital who were investigating why. When they stepped into Burnmaster's room, they saw him hobbling around on crutches. Gulbenkian and the teenagers were there, congratulating the South African on his newfound mobility. Nikki Zipster had some way to go before she would be out of bed. They were all shocked to see Mohawk and Maine in such good health. The two Koreans were at a loss to explain how they managed to survive the avalanche. Burnmaster suggested that they all should have jumped off the mountain instead of jumping into the crevasse. Soon the conversation turned to other matters. "Flat Top hasn't woken up yet?" asked Isabelle. "No, but he will soon," Maine replied. He exchanged a glance with his brother. "That's why we came to see you all." Isabelle frowned, not sure what the giant Korean was getting at. They all waited for him to continue. "Well," he began, clearing his throat self-consciously, "there's something we want to tell you." There was no easy way to say it, so he just plowed ahead. "When we met you, we said we were university students from South Korea, but that's not entirely true." "Actually," interrupted Mohawk, "it's not true at all." "Right," continued Maine. His facial muscles twitched as he attempted a relaxed smile. "You see, we've never been to university, we're actually in the army, and we came to Nepal on a very specific mission to find a yeti." "Shush," Isabelle hissed. She hurriedly closed the door to the hospital room, then turned back to the Koreans. "I don't think it's a good idea to go announcing that sort of thing around here. In case you haven't noticed, we're in a place that is filled with yetis, so it's kind of taboo to talk about missions to find them, if you know what I mean." Maine gently put his hands on Isabelle's slender shoulders and said, "I appreciate your concern, but..." His voice trailed off. "Look," she replied quickly, brushing his hands aside, "you haven't been entirely truthful with us, and we haven't been entirely truthful with you." She saw his look of surprise and continued, "That's right. We never told you this, but we also came to Nepal to look for yeti. We intended to catch one and sell the story to the National Geographic or something. But do you think I'm going to tell that to our hosts? No way. They don't need to know. It doesn't matter anyway, because we've sworn to keep the yeti secret, seeing as they saved our lives and all. So it doesn't matter why you came to the Himalayas. If anybody asks, the story we're going with is that we came here to climb these mountains. You should do the same." Maine nodded. "It's a bit more complicated than that," he mumbled. "What do you mean?" asked Burnmaster. Just then there was a knock on the door. With Burnmaster's question still hanging in the air, Mohawk turned and opened the door to reveal Dr. Vox, the Yeti doctor in charge of Flattop's care, standing there expectantly. She explained that Flattop had woken up a little while ago and was behaving strangely. "What kind of strange behavior?" asked Maine. "He seems very confused," Dr. Vox said, turning to leave. "About what?" asked Mohawk. Vox considered how best to explain it, then replied, "About everything." Mohawk and Maine exchanged a look, then agreed to accompany her back to Flattop's room. Burnmaster watched them go, wondering why they had lied about their background. He hobbled back and sat on the edge of the bed, a thoughtful expression on his face. When the two GXs arrived at Flattop's room, they found him sitting cross-legged on the floor, eating from a tray of green, leafy vegetables. His hands moved back and forth, rhythmically delivering food to his mouth. He chewed slowly like a giraffe eating grass. Maine and Mohawk looked at each other uncertainly, then crouched down beside their brother. "How are you feeling?" asked Maine. Flattop looked from one face to the other. He smiled, a little childlike. "Better now that I have seen both of you," he said. "We were worried about you," Maine continued. "It's good to see you awake." Flattop nodded, and he lowered his voice conspiratorially. "I'm a bit confused about what's going on around here," he whispered. "Have you seen what the doctors and nurses look like? They are all covered in fur. I think we might be in some kind of weird hospital where they do experiments on people." "We need to get out of here. It's not what you think," replied Maine. "You see, they're yetis." Flattop's jaw stopped chewing. "Did you just say yetis?" he hissed. Maine nodded and replied, "It takes a bit of getting used to. We only found out a couple of hours ago." There was a long pause. Flattop looked confused. "What's a yeti?" he asked. Maine started to laugh, then stared at his brother. "What do you mean, what's a yeti?" he muttered. "You know what a yeti is?" Flattop shrugged his shoulders. "I've got no idea what you're talking about," he declared. He resumed chewing on a piece of celery and looked at the two silver-haired giants. "Are you two related?" "You both look a lot like one another." Maine looked at Mohawk in alarm, then back at Flattop. The doctor had said that their brother was behaving strangely. This whole situation was becoming more bizarre. "You don't know who we are?" Mohawk blurted out in surprise. "No," replied Flattop. "Why, do we know each other?" Maine blinked. "Yes, we're brothers," he said slowly and deliberately. "Brothers," repeated Flattop skeptically. He shook his head. "You don't look familiar." Mohawk shuffled forward. "Do you remember what your name is?" he asked. "Of course," scoffed Flattop. "What a stupid question. How could I forget my own name?" "Okay, so what is it?" Mohawk asked pointedly. "It's, Flattop's lips moved but no sound came out. He cleared his throat nervously and tried again. "That is, my name is, His face flushed red with the effort. "It'll come to me in a moment." "Ask me another question." "All right," Mohawk said. "Where do you come from?" Flattop's face became strained, like he was constipated. "America," he declared confidently, then saw the looks on their faces. "No." "How about South America?" "I know, Mexico. No, somewhere in Europe perhaps." "South Korea," answered Mohawk. By unspoken agreement, Maine and Mohawk decided not to reveal their true identities to Flattop for the time being. "Why did you come to Nepal?" Flattop grinned. "That one's easy," he grunted. To find us. To find a mountain, I think." "Not really," Mohawk replied, shaking his head. "Have you remembered your name yet?" Flattop looked glum. "No, but I suppose you're going to tell me," he mumbled. "It's Flattop," said Maine quietly. "Flattop," he said, laughing uncertainly. "What a ridiculous name." "Can't be true." The doctor handed Maine a small mirror at his request, and he passed it to Flattop. "It's your nickname because of your hair," Maine explained. "See for yourself." Flattop examined his reflection, slowly turning his face from side to side as if seeing himself for the first time. He looked up at Maine with new understanding. "We look the same," he said. Maine nodded, then he and Mohawk stood up and moved away with the doctor. Flattop went on chewing on the celery. "What's wrong with him?" asked Maine. "It's like he's forgotten everything he ever learned. He has no idea who we are. From the looks of things, he's suffering from amnesia," explained Vox. That part of the diagnosis was straightforward, though she had some other, more radical, ideas about why Flattop appeared to have reverted back to monkey-like behavior. Theories she would keep to herself until she received the results of the genetic testing. She saw their confused looks and continued. "He has lost his memory because of an injury he sustained to the back of his head. The tests showed swelling of his brain when he was brought into Shangri-La. The swelling has gone down, but the memory loss will take longer to recover from." Mohawk was aghast. "He has lost his memory," he stammered. This was a brand new concept to him. "When will he get it back?" he asked. Vox shrugged and replied, "Maybe tomorrow, maybe next year, maybe never. We have no way of knowing." After the doctor had left, they talked about the situation for a few minutes and realized that Flattop's medical condition was a blessing in disguise. Just before the avalanche, they had decided that the only way to save Burnmaster and his companions was to kill their own brother. He had shown every indication that he would carry out his orders from North Korea to the letter, even if it meant killing the 14-year-olds. Mohawk and Mane couldn't allow that to happen, but now everything had changed. The amnesia had made him a new man. He had forgot his background and his training, everything that made him the cold-blooded killing machine driven to complete the mission in Nepal. The slate had been wiped clean, but this was not an enlightenment. His memory loss hadn't magically taught him the difference between right and wrong. He had simply forgotten that such concepts existed. His mind, which had been a moral vacuum before the avalanche, was now simply a vacuum, a blank canvas that Mohawk and Mane could repaint in their own image. They both recognized the situation as a fantastic opportunity to undo all the damage that had been done to Flattop's mind by the North Korean regime. The upshot was that Flattop was no longer a risk to anybody. His old, evil personality was gone. He was as harmless as a kitten, a 150-kilogram kitten, but a kitten nevertheless. Now there was no need to confess their sins to Burnmaster and the others. They decided to remain in Shangri-La for as long as it took them to return to peak health. Then they would disappear, traveling as far away from North Korea as they possibly could, never to go back to that country ever again. In the days that followed, Isabelle found it difficult to get used to the radical change in Flattop's personality. Ever since meeting him at the landslide on the road to Shabrubesi, she had decided that he didn't care about anybody or anything. In fact, worse than that, her intuition had been telling her that he was filled with malice and evil. She wouldn't have turned her back on him, and was glad that Burnmaster was there to keep an eye on him. So when Mohawk and Mane told her that he had lost his memory, it was with some reluctance that she shook hands with him and introduced herself to him for the second time in her life. She watched nervously as his massive, sausage-sized fingers closed around her slender hand. It was like shaking hands with a convicted serial killer that a prison psychologist had certified was fully reformed. Once she got over her fears, she had to admit he did seem different. The permanent scowl on his face had been replaced with a friendly smile. He laughed a lot like his brothers and tried to make jokes. His dark, brooding presence was gone, replaced with a lightness of step. He was the epitome of niceness. He treated everybody the same, whether they were a yeti or a human. Slowly, Isabelle started to trust him, and after a little while her suspicions faded away and she forgot about the old Flattop. Everybody deserved a second chance, she reasoned, and he had changed for the better, even if he had not exactly seen the error of his ways. One afternoon, Pemba, Zaw and Abby took Isabelle down to the engineering levels of the underground city, where the stifling heat from the lava flows far below was used to turn the huge turbines that produced Shangri-La's electricity supply. Isabelle was still astonished at how open they were about their secret city. It seemed that there was no street, no level, no building, and no piece of information that was off limits. That was not to say that she could walk into any house she wanted. Shangri-La's citizens had the usual level of privacy that she expected in her home city. She couldn't just walk into a stranger's house in London, and nor could she here in Shangri-La. But she had unrestricted access to all of the public areas, and as far as she could tell, nobody was following her or keeping tabs on where she went and what she saw. But there was one rule: no pictures allowed. There were no signs, and it was never actually said to her, but she got the message. The camera in her rucksack mysteriously went missing, as did everybody else's cameras. It was a real shame, but it made sense when she thought about it. No matter how much of Shangri-La she saw, she could never prove a word of it. But one photograph of a toga-wearing yeti would get the world's attention. After leaving the engineering levels, they went to a park and sat down on a carpet of lush green grass. Zaw pitched small flat stones into a pond and watched them skip across the crystal waters, frightening the plump fish and sending them scattering for the cover of the big green lily pads floating on the shimmering blue surface. Pemba picked at the grass absently. "You've been here for almost 2 weeks now," he said. "Are you bored yet?" Isabelle shook her head. "Bored with Shangri-La?" She laughed. "I don't think I could ever get bored with this place." Zaw paused mid-throw. "Try living here all of your life," he muttered. "You don't know how good you've got it," Isabelle said. "This place is paradise compared to the rest of the world." "That's my point exactly," replied Zaw. "You have the opportunity to see the rest of the world and compare it to Shangri-La. If you're a yeti, this place is more like a—" He cast another stone into the pond, then said, "more like a cage. You still haven't told me where this place is exactly, Isabelle said. We're in the Himalayas, Zaw said carefully. You know that? Yeah, Isabelle replied, but where exactly? Zaw gave her a sidelong glance. That's for us to know and for you not to know, he answered. The only thing I'm allowed to tell you is that the UFOs that people sometimes report flying around the world all come out of the mountain next to ours. They live there. The Himalayas are a hotbed of alien activity. Isabelle's eyes opened wide in surprise. Are you serious? She exclaimed. Gotcha, Zaw chuckled, then shook his head. So gullible, how humans ever took over the world I'll never understand. Isabelle gave him a dark look, then saw an opportunity to raise an issue she had been dying to discuss. Well, when the yetis take over the world you won't be stuck in this cage anymore, she said. You'll be able to go wherever you want. Zaw flung another stone with the extra force born of frustration. Yeah, like that's ever gonna happen, he grumbled. Earth to Isabelle, in case you haven't noticed, we are hiding in a cave in the Himalayas. Does that sound like a population that's ready to take over the world? You sound so skeptical, but it looks pretty obvious to me, Isabelle explained. Abby laughed. What are you talking about? She asked. We aren't going to take over the world. Why, you guys are better than us, Isabelle said, indicating Pemba and herself. Faster, stronger, all that stuff. You should be the #1 species on the planet. I'm glad you think so, replied Zaw with a grin. And by the way, you left out smarter and better looking. Isabelle made a face and retorted, that might be going a little bit far. Abby smoothed one furry hand over the wrinkles on her pink toga. I can understand why you say that, she said, but the fact is that we are never going to be the #1 species, as you put it. Why? Asked Isabelle, curious. Because, Zaw said quickly before his sister could reply, the yeti population numbers in the thousands whereas the human population numbers in the billions. He said that word with a showman's flourish. There's over 7 billion of you guys, you're like ants crawling all over the planet. And to emphasize his point, he ran the fingers of one hand up his other arm in a rapid crawling motion. Isabelle frowned. If the only reason is the size of the population, why don't yetis have, more baby yetis? She asked. Zaw flicked his last stone into the pond, then dropped down on the grass. You're just full of questions today, aren't you? He muttered. Isabelle shrugged and said, just wondering. The answer is that yetis can only have one child every 10 years, Abby explained. So our population is pretty much stuck where it is. Isabelle stared, surprised. One child every 10 years, she repeated. Abby nodded. That's right, she said. This wasn't making sense to Isabelle. Why? She asked. Are there laws in Shangri-La that stop yetis having kids, like the old one-child policy in China? Abby smiled. No, nothing like that, she said. It's just the way things are, biologically, I mean. Isabelle inclined her head. But you and Zaw are siblings, she mused. Twins, yes, Abby agreed, but it's really rare. Yetis are like orangutans, added Pemba. Abby gave him the evil eye. Thank you for that comparison, she snapped. But yes, that's right, orangutans can only have one child per decade and we're basically the same, so it takes us a long time to increase our population. For the record, declared Zaw, that's the only way that we're like orangutans. We're a lot more similar to humans. Obviously, Isabelle agreed with a smile. Well, there is one other similarity to orangutans, began Pemba, and it has to do with the problem of something unpleasant sticking to their hairy backsides whenever they take a dump. Pemba never finished the sentence. Like a flash, he leapt to his feet and raced away, with Zaw hot on his heels and yelling abuse at him. He made it halfway round the pond before the teenage yeti wrestled him to the ground and pressed his face into the mud, forcing him to apologize or drink a mouthful of pond water. Abby watched the boys fool around and knew that the anger and the cursing was just for show. In reality, they would do anything for each other, and were living proof that humans and yetis could develop mutually beneficial relationships of friendship, trust, and respect. Relationships that would last a lifetime and transcend the differences between the two species, except for the odd fight by the pond from time to time. Abby knew that it hadn't always been that way. The history classes that she took at school in Shangri-La included lessons about the origins of her species and how, 40,000 years ago, the rise of the human population had forced her people to gradually retreat into the mountains. The retreat was the beginning of the Yeti's secret existence, the result of witnessing the humans systematically murder an entire race of hominids, the Neanderthals, a short, stocky species of hunter-gatherers that had a unique and rapidly developing culture and language of their own. Over a period of 1,000 years, a murderous screaming tide of humankind swept across the continents, mercilessly hunting down the Neanderthals until every man, woman, and child had been stabbed, beaten, or burned to death. The genocide was the most bloody and horrible chapter in all of human history and established Cro-Magnon man, the original human beings, as the dominant species on the planet. A status they continue to hold to the present day. The humans had no record of the event. Cro-Magnon man had proven himself adept at swinging a club but had not at that time developed the ability to write. That meant the wholesale killing of the Neanderthals would have been lost to time if not for the yetis who, having already developed a rudimentary alphabet, witnessed the genocide and carefully recorded it on stone tablets. Items which had survived to the present day and were among the most significant artifacts in the Shangri-La Museum. Abby knew from reading articles on the humans' internet that the reasons why the Neanderthals had become extinct was a hotly debated topic, but for the yetis, the answer to that question was known and a matter of settled historical fact. But precisely why the Neanderthals were killed was another issue entirely. The Yeti scholars of the day who witnessed the genocide observed that it could not have been a war over resources because food, wood, and animals to hunt for meat and fur were plentiful. Nor could the humans have acted in self-defense because the Neanderthals were, the scholars wrote, not aggressive and therefore unlikely to have started the war. After years of debate, the absence of reasonable reasons to justify the genocide led to the conclusion that the humans' motivations were probably unreasonable ones, and that the killing of the Neanderthals was the first and most significant event of racial hatred in the history of the world. The Yetis of the time knew that they would be next in line unless they hit the road, and that they did, retreating into the frozen regions of the planet where, due to the Yetis' special physical characteristics, only they could survive and prosper. As generations of Yetis lived and died, they moved deeper into the mountains, adapting, surviving, until thousands of years later the species existed solely in the most isolated and inhospitable area of the world, the Himalayas. And there they lived in a secret society for thousands and thousands of years. The humans went on to inherit the earth and the Yetis were eventually forgotten. The few stories that remained about the race of tall, furry hominids became the stuff of myth and legend, something that historians gave no credibility. Like vampires and werewolves, the Yetis became another imaginary creature, an abominable snowman complete with fangs and bloodshot eyes, a storyteller's creation to scare children. That was exactly what the Yetis wanted. For while humankind had forgotten about the Yetis had not forgotten about humankind or what they did to the Neanderthals so many millennia ago. Humans could not be trusted. They were a technologically advanced but morally bankrupt race, destined to destroy themselves and everything else on the planet. This essential truth was proven time and again to generations of Yetis who watched from the safety of Shangri-La as countless human civilizations were torn apart by war. Watched as humans visited unspeakable cruelties on one another in the pursuit of power and glory. The wisdom of the Yetis' decision to withdraw from the world was reconfirmed for thousands of years. The rise of democracy and human rights brought new hope, and Abby wanted to believe that things were different now, that the world was different now. She wanted to believe that people really cared for each other. The problem was there were more wars being fought than ever before in human history, more humans dying of preventable hunger and disease, more babies being trafficked, and more first-world governments turning a blind eye. Despite all of their advances, humankind was still the same cold-hearted ape that killed off the Neanderthals. That was why it was so important for the world to believe that stories about Yetis were just a hoax. To protect the secret of Shangri-La, Isabelle laughed and clapped her hands as she saw Zaw slip and fall head first into the pond. Pemba, covered in mud, stood up and cheered. Abby watched the blonde-haired girl in silence, thinking how sad it was that humankind was bad, because as far as she could tell, there were so many nice ones.
That is the end of this chapter. To listen to the next chapter on YouTube or to purchase the digital ebook from Amazon, see the links in the description.